Good morning. I hope you had a wonderful Memorial Day holiday weekend, and thank you for joining us for today's Business Support Series webinar. This is actually our 21st episode of the Business Support Series. I'm Mike Neal, President and CEO of the Tulsa Regional Chamber. The Chamber's Business Support Series offers insights on how your organization can effectively respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. There's an area where the Chamber can be of assistance to you or your company. We hope that you'll please let us know. Almost all travel has been halted during the past 2 months during this crisis, and the future of travel will look different moving forward. Today, we'll discuss the future of transit and travel. But before we discuss the topic in more detail with our outstanding speakers, I'd like to thank the sponsors of our Business Support Series. You see them listed at the bottom of your screen: Luxa Enterprises, Matrix Force, Stennett & Associates, and Security Bank. And speaking of Security Bank, we are pleased to have with us Dawn Stafford. Dawn is the President and Chief Financial Officer of Security Bank. She will introduce today's speakers. Dawn, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Mike. It's an honor to join everyone today and introduce our speakers. Patrick G. Gillespie is Vice President for TRC Companies. He also serves as their Deputy National Practice Leader for Building Sciences and Industrial Hygiene and their National Director for Environmental Management and Sustainability Services. He has more than 30 years of diversified professional experience, serving a wide array of clients, both public and private, while leading TRC's auditing and sustainability practices. Patrick has been on the leading edge of TRC's Back to Work and COVID-19 response teams, developing collaborative solutions to support public and private entities as they prepare to resume their operations. Our second speaker, Alexis Higgins, is the Chief Executive Officer of Tulsa Airports Improvement Trust. Alexis was named CEO of the trust in March 2019. The Tulsa Airports Improvement Trust is the operating entity for Tulsa International Airport and R.L. Jones Jr. Airport. She oversees the administration, operation, and development of both airports and their combined 5,200 plus acre campuses. Previously, Alexis served as Chief Operating Officer and Director of Marketing and Air Service. Her 20-year career with TAIT has focused on building relationships with airport employees, customers, tenants, and the community in support of developing campaigns and strategies that drive airport activity. Thank you both for joining us today. Patrick, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Dawn, and good morning, everyone. We appreciate the opportunity to meet with you this morning. As the coronavirus hit the U.S., TRC's transit agency and transportation authority clients recognized that they had to keep operating throughout the crisis, and they were quick to respond to the crisis. Next slide, please. They sought to assure their customers and their ridership that they could safely utilize public transportation, their employees that they could come to work and safely operated the buses, trains, perform maintenance activities, man service desks, etc. And then, of course, there were the hundreds of vendors and suppliers that support these operations who required the same assurances. In the initial days of the crisis, transit clients rapidly reviewed and updated their safety management systems, their safety policies and procedures, adapting them for COVID-19 specific procedures. They conducted PPE assessments, including training of personnel in the proper usage of PPE. And then they assessed and implemented various administrative and engineering controls to allow them to continue to work through the crisis. They also reviewed and modified cleaning protocols, and in many cases conducted third-party cleaning verification to document that they were doing everything that they possibly could to clean the various facilities that they were responsible for. So a great deal was done. It was done very quickly, and recognizing, however, that it was during a period of dramatically reduced ridership. And now as the states are reopening, the ridership will begin to pick up, and they will be asking the same questions. And while these questions and concerns are geared to transit and transportation agencies for this discussion, they obviously apply to all businesses. People are going to ask, I need to return to work. Has my employer done what they should to make my place of work safe? Did they clean it correctly? Did they disinfect it? Have they followed the CDC protocols and guidelines? And have they implemented third-party cleaning verification as required? Have they implemented all the administrative and engineering controls that are necessary, including social distancing, PPE, et cetera, et cetera? Next slide, please. So as the states reopen, the transit agencies and authorities that TRC works with have, for the most part, adopted an overall program management approach to COVID that includes these three major categories: cleaning and decontamination, back to work procedures or considerations, and then ongoing safe site management. For the cleaning and decontamination, they're continuing to consider the review, development, or refinement of cleaning protocols, the training and mentoring of on-site cleaning contractors, making sure they are following the two-step CDC cleaning recommendations, and then conducting cleaning verification as necessary to document that the cleaning has been achieved to the levels that are sought. There also is a need during this step to make sure you are collecting the data, managing the cleaning data, analyzing it. Are we making positive trends? Are we achieving the levels of cleanliness that we seek? And then obviously reporting that out to the various authorities. As we move to the second major grouping, back to work, there's the review and development of workspace protocols, most of which have been altered. There's specific work permits for projects on site or other requirements for on-site activities. There's an extensive amount of training of employees in the new and modified procedures, including PPE, safe social distancing, and working within the various engineering controls. As we move on to ongoing safe site management, there's increasingly the tech-enabled support of automated body temperature separation tracking of personnel who are on site, whether they're employees or contractors, and then the testing and screening of those workers and contractors as they enter these facilities. Other considerations for safe site management are the opportunity to have employees who can work at home to work at home. That's been a very consistent modification within these agencies. More and more employees are able to work at home, and they're improving the technologies that are in place to allow employees to more effectively work from home. Another trend as we're seeing as we move into safe site management is the requirement for increased temporary EHS site augmentation as clients look to temporarily provide additional personnel to make sure all of these new procedures for safe site management are effectively implemented. As we move forward, increased focus on indoor air, previous slide. Increased requirement for indoor ambient air monitoring, HVAC system review and monitoring, and of course, project controls in support of what might be anticipated in terms of arbitration or litigation services in the future. Next slide, please. The lesson throughout this coronavirus response, there have been multiple lessons learned. And of course, there are new developments and new CDC updates every day, and those will continue, and obviously we'll adjust to those. And of course, each industry sector presents different scenarios, but one consistent finding that we've had throughout this entire crisis has been the effectiveness, or in many cases, the ineffectiveness of existing cleaning operations. And that's not to universally critique cleaning companies. Many of them do an excellent job. But we have found in many cases that the cleaning is not reaching the desired standards. And we've had to work with the cleaning companies, the cleaning crews, their supervisors to make sure they are adopting the CDC recommended two-step cleaning process, cleaning first, followed by disinfection, but cleaning with soap and water with a focus on high touch and low touch surfaces, and then performing verification testing to confirm the standards have been achieved, followed by disinfection. So with slight modifications to cleaning crew procedures, which notably did not involve any change to crew size or loss of production of those crews, the cleaning standards have routinely been achieved. And we've seen the same or very, very similar situations across multiple industries: oil and gas refineries, hospitality industry, commercial real estate. So that relatively simple lesson learned is something that we've seen to be very effective for our clients. Next slide, please. So as all of our clients move back to return to work, and if the transit agencies have obviously been at it throughout the entire crisis, so I think they have a good understanding where they are. But a lot of companies are just returning to business, and they're not sure where they stand or what the next steps might be. So if that's the case, TRC has put in place a back to business self-assessment. It's free, it's fast, it's online, the link's provided there, and it gives you a good idea of what next steps might be required. So thank you. I appreciate the time this morning, and move on to Alexis.
All right, good morning, everybody. While they work on getting the slides moved up. So thanks, Patrick. I was writing down a few things. You're right, we have been at this for a while now. We've never shut down, but we've definitely seen a decline in the number of people going through the building. And I think these slides will kind of give you an update on where we're at today. The first slide just kind of gives you an understanding of the big picture. And so, you know, we hear a lot from people saying, is this as bad as 9/11? Well, it's actually way worse than 9/11. So on 9/11, we were down about 26% in seats. Now this is nationwide, this isn't just in Tulsa, but you can kind of see we were down about 12.3 million seats in September of 2001. And then in 2008, as a result of this recession, we were down about 8 million seats. And then in May of this year, compared to May of last year, we're down 75%. We've lost 66 million seats in the domestic US market. Next slide, please. And so the next, if you click through it, so 111 million seats were removed for April and May, and we're already seeing 55 million removed for June. I think the good news is that airlines have already started reducing the number of flight cancellations in April, and through a good portion of May, airlines had flights scheduled, and then they were canceling over half of them, which for those essential people who are trying to travel made it a little bit difficult. Now we haven't had a cancellation. Our flights that are scheduled are operating, and that helps improve the reliability of service for our customers, our mutual customers. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a visual of, if you click all the way through, 63% of all domestic capacity was removed from the market. I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot through the chamber is nonstop flights, and how are we going to get additional nonstop flights? Well, the mindset has really shifted from new nonstop flights to how can we retain all of our existing flights. And really that's a function of the community and what's taking place here, and how is demand triggering the need for additional flights. Next slide. So this kind of gives you a picture. The dark purple line on the top is 2019 traffic. The pinkish line in the middle, the solid line, is what is scheduled for 2020 in terms of capacity. And you can see starting in April, really, we saw a significant decline in capacity. And then our April numbers, we were just about 96% down over last year. We haven't gotten all of May's numbers yet, but we're projecting May to be about 90% down over last May. But in a second, I'll get to some glimmers of hope that we've seen this past week. We went from 51 daily departures down to 14. The next slide will kind of show that in a better light. So all of the airlines have had to reduce their schedules just because they were flying empty airplanes. And so we've lost 8 markets total. So as airlines are scaling back, they're not flying to as many destinations. But the good news is, as I said earlier, those 14 flights that are scheduled are flying. And we actually had 17 flights depart yesterday. Next slide, please. And if you click through this, this kind of gives you the daily passenger throughput numbers. So the airlines don't provide us with their bookings or with their activity until the month following the activity. And so it makes it kind of hard for us to gauge what's really happening. But TSA does share with us their throughput numbers. And so that gives us an idea of, are we starting to pick up? Our slowest week was the week of April 12th. We had 1,300 people go through the terminal that week. To compare that to an average week in April of last year, it was 37,000 people a week. So it's just a significant reduction. The good news is on one day this weekend, on I think it was Friday, we had 1,500 people go through the terminal in one day, and we were jumping for joy because there were 1,500 people in the terminal that day. And so I think that that's a sign that leisure travelers, vacation travelers in particular, are starting to say, hey, I need to go out and see family, or I want to go on that vacation that I've been thinking about, in particular to those beach destinations. Next slide, please. One of the important things for us as an airport and for our industry is to really focus on messaging. And so you've heard all of the airlines talk about what their requirements are if you're going to be flying in terms of wearing a mask and how to protect yourself and what they're doing on board the airplane. Well, the airport industry is doing the same thing. And so we're wanting to make sure that your message in Tulsa, Oklahoma is going to be the same message that you receive when you get to your destination, that we're not all going to be scattered in terms of what our requirements are. So focusing on communication is really important. We have on our social page a survey. If you could take the survey, it really will provide insight to us specifically for Tulsa, and also allow us to benchmark ourselves to the national market. But just getting an idea of how comfortable are you, what do you want to see when you travel. Cleaning is of course very important. We've been doing that. We haven't slowed down at all. We've actually added some different cleaning methods. Of course, the high touch point areas are important. Tulsa is a great airport because you really don't have to touch a lot. All of our doors are automated. Really, the restroom door and the handrail to the escalator are the highest touch point areas our cleaning teams are going through. We have people dedicated to just wiping those down. We have started the nightly spraying of the terminal with AquaCode, and then we're also looking at adding an electrostatic sprayer to the mix, which would be like a fog that we'd be able to sanitize our surfaces with every night. We have 18 hand sanitizing stations. We have announcements playing. We have signs up. The airlines are participating by putting plexiglass up to protect their employees and their customers. And so we're all just really trying to work together. Even our concessionaires that are open are encouraging social distancing by putting space between customers that are standing in line or that might be seated in certain areas. And so I would just say we've hit our low, but we still have a long way to climb. It'll be several months, if not next year, before we'll be back to pre-COVID levels. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Patrick and Alexis. We'll not be able to take live questions on this webinar, but we have several questions that were submitted in advance for our panelists that I will begin addressing. And that really has to do with the first one. Many people rely on public transit to travel. How many different public transit models added safety precautions for their riders and operators? Patrick, let's begin with you with that.
Well, Mike, I would say that public transit agencies have a very strong network, and they communicate very frequently. So I'd say at this point, most have adopted similar administrative and engineering controls, requirements for PPE, face masks, gloves, both for employees, vendors, and for passengers as well in many cases. They've also gone through the social distancing with limited seating, with demarcation of separation zones, and then put in place controls such as rear entry for vehicles to protect drivers, et cetera. So I think between the administrative controls, the engineering controls, and then as Alexis was just saying, implementation of enhanced cleaning procedures and then verification testing in many cases, I think many of them have implemented those procedures at this point. And as I said earlier, they've been in business throughout the entire crisis, although at a very reduced ridership. So they've been making progress in these areas.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Alexis, First question for you. As you discussed, the future of air travel is still uncertain. You mentioned at the end of your presentation, but I guess my question, maybe digging a little deeper, is, what's your best guess for when, call it non-essential travel will really begin to pick up, and what kind of pace do you see toward its recovery?
Well, I think, starting with our market first, with Oklahoma, they lifted the restriction on non-essential travel about a week ago or so. And we definitely have seen an uptick since that occurred. And I think what it's really going to take is going to be a nationwide kind of lift of the stay-at-home orders. And as that occurs, as Vegas opens, once Disney World opens, and some of these key destination markets begin opening and people feel safe traveling to those markets, that we'll start seeing some additional non-essential travel. As far as business travel goes, though, I think that is still kind of the undetermined, the big elephant in the room, so to speak. I mean, we were just talking, Patrick, before the call, and many companies have put a hold on corporate travel. Some that I've heard have extend through the end of the year. And so we're looking at, next winter, January, before we start seeing some of that corporate travel return. And I think that's kind of the issue that we're all going to have to digest as an industry, and the airline industry in particular. That's kind of their bread and butter in terms of revenue. And we definitely would like to see that come back as soon as it's safe to do so.
Sort of the follow-up question, Alexis, to that really is something that someone asks me all the time. A couple people asked me this yesterday, and that is, do you personally feel safe to get on a plane and to travel to one of our direct destinations? Do you feel safe to put you or your family on a plane and go now?
Absolutely. I think all of the airlines have taken the necessary precautions to disinfect their aircraft. Their employees are wearing masks. They're requiring their passengers to wear masks. And I definitely would get on a flight and get to the beach as soon as possible. We have a new market. Actually, Allegiant has decided to go ahead and launch their Nashville service starting June 4th. And that's another example. The airline industry recognizes that those leisure vacation travelers are wanting to get up and get out. And so I would encourage people, you might see me on that nonstop flight.
That was good. Thank you, Alexis. Question for both speakers really has to do with, are there any tracing measures that can be implemented if an employee or a traveler were to test positively for COVID-19?
So I can take that first, Patrick, if you'd like. So really, it's up to the airlines to provide any necessary tracing or notification of their employees. That definitely is, or of their passengers. That's definitely become a hot button issue. I mean, as we know, for the Tulsa community, our first positive case was from somebody who's traveling home from Italy. And so there was some concern about notifying everybody on that aircraft. So I think that airlines realize that that's a component that they're going to need to be able to answer and provide to customers if and when a positive case is identified on an aircraft. But I'm not familiar with those specific tracing methods.
Patrick, how about from a transit perspective or other motor transportation perspective?
I think from a transit agency perspective, unfortunately, there have been a number of employee cases, which they are more readily able to trace, where their activities have been, when they've been in agency facilities, when they've been in agency vehicles, et cetera. And we have worked with them to help put together a model for tracing of employees. I think the passengers is a much more difficult situation, particularly in terms of trains and buses, et cetera. I think airline, obviously, more specificity to the ticketing process, et cetera. Where people are coming from, where they're going. But I think on the employee side, we've done a lot with the tracing of employees, and then the self-quarantining and the monitoring, and obviously the positive testing or or not positive testing, I'm sorry, prior to the return to the workplace. But as I said, with the transit system, the employees are relatively easy to trace. I shouldn't say that. They're easier to trace than the ridership.
Patrick, a follow-up to you, and I'll ask
Sure.
for a 30-second response, and that is, how can a business utilize your back-to-business assessment? How can they access that?
Well, I saw one of the questions popped up there about the link. We provided the link in the PowerPoint. You could provide that to people. I don't know if you distribute the slides or not, but TRC has a link for the back to business self-assessment tool. It's just a series of pretty straightforward questions that any business, it can apply to any sector, any market sector, but it's just a series of questions that they can ask. And it does basically an automatic assessment based on their responses to the questions of where they are in their readiness status to return to work. You know, we've been talking about transit. They've been at it throughout the entire crisis. Other companies are just returning to work now. You know, so it's an easy tool. It's easy, it's fast, it's free. You know, so it's a good way to just establish your readiness and maybe set up or establish what next steps you might want to implement as your company returns to work.
Thanks, Patrick. We've got 4 minutes remaining. I'll toss our distinguished sponsor, Dawn Stafford, to ask our final question. Dawn, you're still muted.
Sorry. I'm going to be traveling to Columbus, Ohio in a couple of weeks. So what is the biggest piece of advice you have for somebody who will be traveling on an airplane or public transportation?
I can take that first. So,
Yeah, sure.
So, you know, we always say, give yourself plenty of time. Well, that's especially important given the current environment that we're in today. In Tulsa, you know, we're used to walking right up and getting through the checkpoint, but screening is taking a little bit longer at airports because of the added distancing measures. You can take extra hand sanitizer in your carry-on bag. You can have all those products available to you. And I would just encourage you to become familiar with the rules of engagement at your destination airport, as well as, you know, any airports that you're going to stop at along the way.
Thanks, Alexis. Patrick?
Very similar. I would say make sure you take the time to call ahead, learn the procedures for where you're departing from and where you're arriving, as Alexis just said. Understand their guidance before you leave. Again, as Alexis said, assume things are going to move a lot slower than you're accustomed to. You're not just running through the airport anymore. And then make sure you take the appropriate PPE, whether it be face mask or nitrile gloves or whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. And then obviously the sanitizer wipes and things of that nature once you're on a plane or on a public transit. I think those are very common sense type things. But planning ahead is the key one. Make sure you know what the requirements are.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick, Alexis, and Dawn for joining us today. Again, I'd like to thank Security Bank, Stennett & Associates, Lux Enterprises, and Matrix Force for their support of this series. To anyone who came in late, called in by phone, or would like to share this webinar with colleagues, a recording will be posted on the Chamber's website later today. We will also gladly post the survey or the link to the Return to Work forum that was mentioned by Patrick. We'll gladly post that and make that available for you all to find, have access to. Our next Business Support Series webinar will be this Thursday, May the 28th at 11 a.m. We'll be joined by Lynn Flynn from the Roland Group and Christy Spaeth of the People Perspective to discuss ethical talent management decisions during challenging times. You can register for all upcoming events on tulsachamber.com/events. Advanced registration is required for all events for safety purposes. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any member of our Chamber staff team or to me personally if we can assist you or your business in any form or fashion. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you have a great week and a great getting back to work process in your respective locations. So thank you. Have a good one, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully Thursday. Bye-bye.